I thought this was of the people.
I don't know how to do that song though. And we're live.
No, not that song. Stop singing. Sorry about that. Hello, Ericka.
Hello, Robert. Welcome back.
The world has changed a lot in 2 weeks. You guys actually let me take a vacation.
Sir, I think that you should have stayed on vacation had you been wise.
Yeah, well, no one's ever given me, kudos for my intelligence level. So there's that. But you know how we like to start off on this, right? I mean, I got to tell you, there's so much going on, but I tell you that I am under the heading of government overreach. So what's the hardest word to say? Where's that song?
Sorry seems to be the hardest word.
Little Elton John.
Sorry seems to, well, we're under the 7 seconds, so I think we're good. So did you see in the paper? So the IRS, remember that leak of all the tax returns? The IRS has come out and issued a formal apology to the millions of people, including, Ken Griffin from Citadel is the one who filed the lawsuit. Remember that contractor? He leaked Trump's tax returns. They said, "We're sorry. We won't do it again. We're going to have better security measures, but we're really sorry that we leaked your tax returns to everyone, including the New York Times."
Wow.
Wait. The Internal Revenue Service sincerely apologizes to Mr. Kenneth Griffin and the thousands of other Americans whose personal information was leaked to the press.
You have got to be kidding me right now.
I just sit here sometimes and I'm not sure which is worse, the hubris from the government or the sort of lackadaisical response from the American public who, I'm surprised they weren't storming the Capitol with I shouldn't say storming the Capitol with January 6th, but, with pitchforks because so we send this sensitive data to the government and the government can't keep it confidential. And of course, it wasn't leaked for political purposes.
You know what? Here's the deal. If the American people were paying attention, they might be storming something. But they're too busy reading the stories about how apparently there's actually aliens and what is some of the other nonsense. Benjamin whenever we hear these stories, Benjamin just goes like this. He puts one hand behind his back. You can't see it in the camera, but he puts one hand behind his back and he goes like this. He's like, what are they hiding behind their back when they show you Kim Kardashian's sex tape? Okay. Like there's something else going on, ladies and gentlemen, that they don't want you to know about.
I believe they call that deflection, but in any event, it's good to be back. Never starve the beast, right? The one thing that will always get you in trouble with the government, talk to Al Capone, right? It is don't pay your income taxes. But if you pay your income taxes, we would hope that the government would keep our information private and not have to apologize. It's sort of like closing the barn door after the animals are gone.
Yeah.
Let's roll them.
Yeah. All right.
Hello and welcome to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin. So nice to be back with you after my little hiatus that they let me take. Stay tuned later on in the show. We have a special guest, Dr. Robert Wolf, with his new book, Not My Enemy, which is the personal journey of his family escaping the Holocaust in Hungary. It is about as riveting a read and really historically so important these days. So stay tuned for that. But you go away for a couple of weeks and you come back, and what a difference a day makes, Ericka. Ericka?
What a difference a day made. 24 little hours.
And what are we talking about? Well, what everyone else is talking about is the Trump-Biden or Biden-Trump debate. So what a difference a day makes, right? We were told this was going to be like Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, right? The battle of the century. Instead of Joe Frazier, you got Chuck Wepner. Anybody who's a boxing fan remembers the bleeder from Bayonne. So instead of the bleeder from Bayonne, we have the Delaware dope. And before anybody gets upset with me for calling the president a dope, I took no pleasure in those debates, and I took no pleasure in seeing my president, and it's my country and it's my president as it's everyone's, who really not only didn't do well, but is really suffering cognitive issues. The fact that they even put him up there is really, a question here. So I took no pleasure in it. But an important thing to understand is it wasn't just the American people that were watching this. It were the other countries that were watching this, and the enemies of America. And let's be candid, as we always try to be here. Weakness breeds aggression in international politics, in life in general, but certainly in international politics. So you have to ask yourself, was this a soft coup, right? Why did you put first of all, why weren't we told the truth? We were always told that these were deep fakes or these were edited. And clearly what we saw was a president whose cognitive abilities was on the decline. And that bodes ill for the country. To put a president in a debate like that before the convention, which has never been done in the history of the country, certainly in the history of the debates, right, which go back to, I think, the early 1960s, certainly the Nixon Kennedy debate. So why do that unless there's an ulterior motive to all of this, right? And now you hear all the excuses. Well, it's only a debate. Well, debates don't really matter. Well, what really matters is not 90 minutes, but 3.5 years. Here's the truth of the matter. Saying that Joe Biden had a bad debate is like saying Jeffrey Dahmer is just a cross-dresser trans, okay? This was such an embarrassment for the process, for the people. I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat. It makes no difference to me. This reflected poorly on the country and all of this. So all I can tell you is bye-bye Joe Biden. Or as we like to say, Biden is by. Done. And it's just a question now of whether or not they replace him before or after the convention, but they will force him out one way or the other. You're already seeing the poll numbers drop. You're already seeing some of the donors who want their money back, surefire signs. And that's the monologue. And joining us, we're going to segue to something way more important than politics in this country, is a personal family experience. Joining us now, Dr. Robert Wolf, radiologist, author, Not My Enemy. Dr. Wolf, welcome to Of the People.
Actually, Dr. Wolf is not with us at the moment,
but
hopefully he will be back shortly.
So we can go back to Bye Bye Biden
without him.
Wait, dude. Did you like my sign?
I do.
Did you like my sign?
I do. That is really good. I'm going to start calling him Bye Done.
Right. Biden equals Bye Done. Right? Because, I
love it.
Look, to me, I still think this was a soft coup, right? How do you put a president out there without knowing that this was going to be there? And by the way, here's the real question. Can you imagine if he wasn't pumped up with something like Adderall, which he clearly was, how bad this would have been?
I can't fathom, honestly, Robert. And as a person who happened to have partaken in uppers at one time or another in my life, I know, shocking, hard to believe, but true nonetheless. That's people were like, oh my God. And I'm like, that is a sign that someone is on drugs, that wide-eyed, non-blinking, giant pupil, like that is a sign someone is on drugs. So I don't know, maybe, it's probably not like Adderall or meth. It's probably some special something developed by the military, but I don't know. Right. Robert. And
I understand that Dr. Wolf is with us. So ladies and gentlemen, joining us, because I'm going to segue hard, right?
I'm not.
Lord Benjamin says he is. So let's bring him on, because this is really what I wanted to, was excited to talk about today. So Dr. Wolf, new book, Not a Real Enemy. It's a personal journey of his family's flight from Hungary to this country, surviving the Holocaust, surviving communism. And it's a compelling story. Dr. Wolf, thank you so much for joining us on Of the People.
Hi, nice to meet you, and appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. I'm very honored and blessed to be a guest here.
And we are honored and blessed to have you. You know, in this country with the rise of anti-Semitism, these personal stories and these personal triumphs of life over oppression are so very important. So this book won an award, right? It was let me see if I got this right, the Silver Notice Book Award and several other awards. This is a story about your father and your grandfather, correct?
It is. And plus, my dad's parents, my grandfather and mother, both killed at Auschwitz, unfortunately, at age 50.
Sorry.
While my dad was at forced labor camp. My mom's grandfather, too, a rabbi, was also killed at Auschwitz. A real threat to society. And my dad's dad was a dentist who couldn't be a doctor because he was Jewish, but they were kind of blended in together anyway. And he was a captain on a Red Cross ship in World War I. So my dad's parents did Hungary a lot of service, as did my dad, too, before they decided to leave. So, and not a real enemy. Yeah, we've won several awards, 4 awards, which I'm very proud of that. But I'm not the type to sit on my laurels and say, this is good enough, because it means a lot. It means that people recognize the importance of our work and the quality of our work. And, I owe that to a great team. My co-author, Janice, did an amazing job with the book. Our publisher, our publishing house, Amsterdam Publishers, this is their specialty, is Holocaust and related, although this book covers little-known Hungary and obviously World War I all the way to the end of the Hungarian Revolution.
That's an interesting point that you make, Dr. Wolf, is we don't hear much about the other countries involved in World War II, involved in Nazi Germany and those things. You hear a lot about, Germany and, maybe France, or maybe a little bit of Italy, maybe a little bit of Russia. But what do you think made your folks coming from Hungary different? Like, how do you think that changed the story?
Well, that's such a great point. I mean, yeah, we all know about Okinawa and Midway and the bombing of Normandy and London and Germany and the end of the war. But yeah, we don't know a lot about Lithuania or Croatia or even Ukraine compared to, say, now. And even now, it seems like such an obscure, faraway place that it's so remote that it's almost imaginary. But yeah, my parents were Hungarian, and they were devout Hungarian people. They loved Mother Hungary, but they wouldn't buy into totalitarianism. They didn't like the right. They didn't like the left. They hated the Nazi Party, and why wouldn't you? Jewish or otherwise, right? Something to teach these Hamas sympathizers is that the Nazis were no friends of yours either. So keep that in mind. We can talk about that for an hour, but neither are the communists. I mean, Putin threatening nuclear war every other day and this kind of thing. And that's part of the reason that I don't think America got too involved with Hungary in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution. It's another topic of discussion. But yeah, the book was so amazing, and so few people know about Hungary. I mean, hardcore historians, World War II historians certainly do. But the twist on this is it's my dad's viewpoint of it, my dad's biography, that I converted from an autobiography that he and my mom wrote in the 70s. And they wrote the stories as though they had happened the previous day. They were very sharp. They were educators. They were Holocaust educators. They were also well-rounded people that loved arts and music and museums and travel, education, all those things. But so they wrote the autobiography, and I converted to a biography a few years ago.
Right.
We've got some great pictures that were shared from the book, Dr. Wolf. Who was the person who escaped from imprisonment twice?
My dad. It's imprisonment. It's a weird. I mean, I always think of imprisonment as being a captor, a captive, but it's not. My dad escaped 4 times actually. So yeah, I mean, four awards and 4 escapes. Twice from during Nazi Hungary. So that was my father. Younger picture while he still had some hair, but super nice guy. He and his friend Frank escaped in the middle of the Carpathian Mountains in the cold thicket of the wintry hills. Just took off from. They thought it was a death march. They knew that the war was almost over. They didn't know who was going to win. They didn't know if they wanted to end up in Austria or Hungary because they were near the Austrian border. But if the Nazis would have won, my dad and his friend would have been screwed probably. And if the Russians won, or the Romanians or whatever other renegades were helping them, then they were probably better off in their homeland. So, but they had heard basically about death marches, which we don't hear about in Hungary and Ukraine. That's another thing. We heard about them in Okinawa, but they happened in continental Europe as well. So they thought this was it, and so they had about a 3-day window to take off, and that's just what they did. They got to the front of the line, as far away from the guards as they could, waited till almost dark, and then just took off. And you can feel the cold, you can feel the thicket, you can feel the thistles cutting in his hands and in his body. You can feel the fear and that second guessing that he had. It's all the way the description was. And again, I owe that to, well, my dad doing the story and pouring his emotions out, but also my co-author for helping me enliven the book, because our initial version of the book was not really accepted by publishers and authors. She turned it more to conversation and that kind of thing. So Second Escape was not as, I can't say not as exciting, because it was amazing timing. It was in front of Nazi headquarters in Budapest, Hungary. And they just came up with a last minute plan, and they came up with some crappy reading material for some of the guys at the front office, a pack of cigarettes, and used the opportunity to fly through the door. Perfect timing between soldiers, got on a streetcar and gone. And and then the two more escapes under communist regime. A little spoiler is that my dad missed an escape under communist Hungary, felt the most unlucky guy in the world, went to the wrong train station, and everybody who made that train got arrested, including his medical school roommate. So if you can believe the luck on this guy, to use a Sopranos type of expression, the luck on this guy is it's unreal. So, and millions of miracles in between, not just the escapes, cloak and dagger stories, hiding places that you wouldn't expect, wearing women's clothing, hiding in casinos, arguing with armed Russian soldiers. So all kinds of stories that amazing. How
there's some great imagery, great photography. You're talking about armed soldiers, you know.
Most of these are civilians. These are photos from the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which was a short war, about 2.5 weeks. Not a lot of people knew about it. It started by college kids, basically, and a radio station. There was just an uprising, and other Eastern European countries were doing. This is one of my favorite photos. It's just these guys are just ready to go. I mean, and the government couldn't decide if they were with the rebels or if they were the Russians. But the Russians ended it pretty swiftly by bringing in their tanks. They thought the Russians teased them too. They said, "We're going to let you have free reign," and they end up reneging on their promise and rolling in with the tanks. And next thing you know, your communism is here to stay. And that's when my parents said, "Enough is enough. Enough persecution, enough oppression." They had an illegal Jewish wedding in Hungary that wasn't allowed under the Soviet regime, and their host, my mom's uncle, a doctor, got arrested for that. So that's a chapter in itself. Hauled away to prison for a year, and they tried to pin the Raoul Wallenberg murder on him, and he wouldn't confess to it. So they tortured him for a year. It was a really, really sad thing.
Well, and isn't it interesting, Dr. Wolf, to hear you talk about what your grandparents and your ancestry, what they were dealing with lawfare, right? And we see that actually today. Our government and nefarious forces in the United States are using lawfare in the same way that it's been used in the past to basically, you know, go after your political enemies, real or perceived.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, the big lesson in the book is I don't want to take, you know, I'm not a big political guy. I'm maybe a little bit right of center. I like reasonable. I don't like extreme right, extreme left. The book will explain why. But no, I don't like when people use political gain as their motivation. I've really had it. But one of the messages in the book is we still shouldn't take for granted how good we have in this country. We're still allowed to vote. We still have choices. We can still write our government and our mayors, and we can plead for. And I don't feel like the police here or the government or the military is after me because I'm Jewish, or my next door neighbor because he's Asian or Muslim or whatever. I don't feel that, which is what you felt. There were no, the government was your enemy back in Hungary, whether it was Nazis or even worse, the Hungarian government was worse than the Nazis. They had the police. The police were worse, and the killing of the innocent people on the Danube right at the end of the war. They had no reason. It went well for Schindler's people, right? At the end, they just they left. The soldiers just took off and let them alone. Didn't work out like that in Budapest. So it was just really awful. How do people get that kind of hatred where they're killing for pleasure? And we can compare what's going on now with the Hamas supporters. I'm not saying Palestinians deserve to live a good life too. I mean, the ones that are not warmongers, the ones that don't want death to Israel or Jews, that's fine. But you don't have a right to come into my neighborhood. You don't have a right to block my synagogue. I wrote a little bit about that today when we were talking about the podcast on social media, and we'll expound on that. But that's the difference between the governments, and at least we can still vote. But it's scary now. Even that, it's rigged. It's not working right. There's votes missing. I mean, we're always arguing about something. I wish I saw more cohesiveness in our country. I guess that's the word, like we had 9/11 and even World War II. Whereas now, COVID split us up, and people forget that 9/11 was American targets. They weren't Jewish targets. So it was hardcore Muslims that were. And people should just indiscriminately blame the Muslims for 9/11 either, because I have a lot of Muslim friends, and they're not all.
Well, and that's, Dr. Wolf, ultimately what we have to be careful of is allowing for the government or news media to make our choices for us. And that's really what I hear you saying is, how do we actually treat each other like neighbors and human beings without letting other people tell us what to think about each other. I think that would be an excellent start.
I agree. Herd mentality is it's a nightmare. It's a disaster, and we're seeing
it is.
And people not doing their homework. They are not doing their homework. So.
Yes, sir. Dr. Wolf, just to make sure we get to it before we forget, we've included a link, all your links to your social media, to your website. Anybody watching, check out the description for web links. You can buy the book on Amazon, everywhere. What would you say, Dr. Wolf, if there's any most important thing that you want people to take away from your grandparents' story, from your parents' story? What would you say? Say?
We talk about our neighbors. Well, there's 50 messages. There's 100 messages in the book. Determination, survival, integrity. It's important to have integrity, sense of team play, a sense of the determination and hope. And we all go through really, really hard times sometimes. But my dad was a prototype for that need to survive, for being able to take the risk. But again, don't take for granted what we have in the free country while we mess around with the nature of things, because what happened to my dad could happen to any one of us. It could be a bad neighbor. It could be a bad local government, federal government, foreign government, natural disaster. Any one of us could be on the run. And not only escaping and being on the run, but also not knowing where you're going. No light at the end of the tunnel. Not knowing where your next meal is going to be or where you're going to sleep next. So it's a scary thing. I'm free, but free to do what? If the next guy sees me, I'm caught. So the freedom is sort of a relative thing. But God forbid it happens to any one of us. And I don't know how I could survive what my dad went through. I don't know how any of us could, because, I hate to say that we're soft, because some people are soft, I guess, as far as, I don't know, maybe that's a bad word. Because
we say that on this show all of the time, Dr. Wolf. You're fine.
We have military, we've got firefighters, we got first responders, we got physicians that are good, nurses. There's a lot of people here that are tough. Construction workers, there's a lot of people that are really tough and good to this country. And I'm just looking for more of that. I guess that's my message is, why are we messing up? Why are we hating our neighbors? Why aren't we, we should, my parents used to engage with people that were from different countries, different religions, different wakes of life. They engage with them. They like to learn from them. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do with all of this is just spread this word against hatred, do a lot of podcasts, do a lot of presentations. It's only my little corner of it, but the book was so well done and has such salient points to it that you can't help but read this book, and if it changes one person a week or two people a month or whatever, I will have done my job. I'd be happy, and it did change my viewpoint. And I'm a conservative Jew. I'm not Orthodox or anything, but I believe in my religion. But I also believe in my brethren's ability to practice their own religion and go to their own mosque and church and temple. It's not the lessons are clear, and so that's my part of it. It's just try to do this, and it's not a fun job, and it got harder after October 7th. It's the realization of what's going on. And my parents wrote this in the 70s, and I worked on this since 2018, and I never would have had an idea that whatever happened 80, 90, 100 years ago would be going on now, and with all these uprisings. I never thought that, and they wrote the stories as though they knew that this was going to happen, and they knew that I was going to reproduce it. And don't you hate it when your parents are right?
So Dr. Wolf, I've been sitting here and listening to you, and it's what you say is compelling. I want to come back to the personal narrative though, because I think, as the last of the Holocaust survivors die off, right? I mean, and these Holocaust deniers, sort of become more prevalent, especially with the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, if not around the world, right? this is really, however, a personal journey for you and your family. And I think it's that personal narrative that is so impactful and why the book is done so well. So growing up,
compelling.
obviously, your parents were educated and educators. And growing up, I mean, was this conversation around the dinner table? I mean, was this something, because a lot of the survivors from the Holocaust didn't talk about it. My father who served and my uncles who served in the war didn't really talk about it. Right? They came home. They were what I call I think Tom Brokaw called them the greatest generation. I call them the silent generation. Right? So, on a personal level, you grew up with this. I mean, was this talked about in the home? I mean, your father, as portrayed in the book and as you've portrayed it, really became this so appreciative, jovial, good-natured, affable, person. I would argue in large part because of the hardships he went through. But what was the personal journey growing up like with your father, who had gone through this arduous escape, not one, not two, not three, but 4 times?
Unfortunately, I didn't think much of it when my first half of my life, because I was pre-med, and then I went to medical school and had my residency and fellowship and had a family. So the first half of my life, first 30, 35 years, didn't think much of it. My dad would mention it sometimes when he was in a big argument or a fight with my mom or me, but no sign of PTSD. You nailed it, saying how affable he was and how you would never know what he went through, because he went on, the punchline is he went on to deliver 10,000 babies in the Detroit area. And that's redemption indeed. You can never bring back your parents or relatives that passed, but it was super. And he loved doing it. He would have worked till the day he died. And I guess that's my big lesson from the first half of his life, is how jovial, how I had no idea what he went through, had no realization. They got me bar mitzvahed. I had piano lessons. I was a pretty good student. I was lucky to have good parents. If you don't have good parents, you're really missing out. I mean, to me, you have nothing. So it was later in life, my mom started educating more people. She belonged to the BTM, our local Temple Sisterhood, and ORDS, and they were very active in the medical community and in the Jewish community. And slowly but surely, they educated. And my family and friends, whoever was around, whoever was interested in listening to the history, my mom loved doing it. My dad too, but not as much, because he was busy with his practice too, of course. So I really didn't get the zap until I read the book the second time. I might have read it 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Didn't think much of it.
That was their book, their first book?
That was their they wrote the autobiography in the 70s, as though they'd happened. The events happened the previous day. It went from paper and pencil to typewriter to a computer to a disc. Dad passes in 97. Mom passes in 2016. Unfortunately, historian friend hands me the disc. I took care of mom's affairs for a year, retired for a year. I'm back to part-time now, but a friend asked me to help him read x-rays part-time from home out of Michigan, which I'm still doing. And that brought me to the disc. It was sort of a Superman's kryptonite. It sort of summoned me. And as a radiologist, I know it's corny, but it's true. I mean, it just summoned me. And so as a radiologist, I've got 2 screens. One is the left screen is the patient list. The right screen are the images. And between cases, I loaded up the disc and turned the autobiography and dictated it into a biography, almost word for word, reviewed the history, reviewed the veracity of what he had, and spent a lot of time finding photos like the ones you shared. And then finally getting a good co-author to really turn the book into something special. So it's been a 6-year project, but now the book's been out for a year and change, and we're just getting going as far as I'm concerned. I've been privileged to be invited to the Long Island Holocaust Museum recently, so I'll be there in March. I've already done a book signing, and that's what it's all about, is meeting these kids and families. Did a great book signing at the Holocaust Museum in DC. I can't tell you what an honor that is, how humbling and blessed. It's good, tough enough to get your book in there, let alone they ask you to come and do a book signing, and then they ask me to return. So I get a get out of jail free card. I get to go back, and I could do that every day, because talking to these kids, there's hope for this country. That's what I get from the families, the friends, and meeting people from all over the world in just a few hours, and getting that kind of support, and seeing those books fly off the shelves and saying, I will get you for a presentation. That's hard. I mean, a lot of people say that, but that's what you're trying to do. That's where the pleasure is sharing the story with people that want to change the world for the better.
And speaking of Dr. Wolf's book, Not a Real Enemy, check it out. We've included the link to go get the book on Amazon and all of his websites and everything. So go check it out. Dr. Robert Wolf, Not a Real Enemy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I appreciate the time, and please stay well and stay in touch.
Yes,
absolutely.
Sir.
We will.
Stay determined. Fight the hatred.
If nothing else, we're determined, Dr. Wolf. I mean,
I can tell. Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate what you guys are doing. I see what your episodes are about, important topics, not just a bunch of rubbish that we see on TikTok or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's
the important thing is to get people to think and to get people to question and to ask questions and to speak up. I do want to end on one note though. Two notes probably. The first really is what you really touched on was important, generally speaking, as a society, that we have lost the ability for civil discourse. That we have, I mean, just because people disagree on things doesn't make you my enemy, right? I mean, we can have passionate opinions on things, but we still live in the greatest country, in the world, in my opinion. Warts and all, right? Not a perfect country, I want to ask one question before I let you go. And I know Ericka and the producers are trying to move us to the commercial, but it's good to be the king is all I can tell you, or at least have your name on top.
That's a great line. I know that line.
Right. I don't want to get into the Supreme Court decision about presidents versus kings. We'll talk about that later in the show. But what I want to really understand in all, I have one real question is, give us your comparison, because you now, this is sort of a personal journey for you and sort of genealogical roots about the triumphs and the hardships your family went through to make you where you are today. Do you see any parallels? Because you hear this talk that this country feels a lot like Weimar Germany in the 1930s, and that may be an excessive comparison. I mean, some people would argue it one way or the other, but clearly the rise in anti-Semitism here has been unparalleled, certainly since World War II. Do you see any parallels there?
Good question.
Well, you summed it up. Thank God 99% of people to me are, I don't like you use the word normal, but 99% of people think like we do. They believe in their family and their career and religion and vacation, and they think. But it's always the one guy who ruins it for everybody. The Pol Pots, the Hitlers, the Osama bin Ladens, the Fidel Castros. It's always one guy that ruins it for everybody. So to go back to what you said about a personal journey, I meant to touch on one other thing too before I forget. It's a very emotional thing, talking about your parents escaping and being persecuted, but also my dad's parents dying in Auschwitz. Reading about it with eyewitness testimony, that's hard. When I did that chapter, I had to walk away from the book for like a week. So it is very personal. So the personal part of it makes it more. It touches me more when I see what's going on in the world. I guess that's the best way to answer it. It hits you where, like, hearing the word Aryan or hearing the words white supremacist, or even Hamas now, it stings me. It's got such a bite to it. So yes, it's personal. Yes, it's parallel. Fortunately, our government, our police, our military are still on all of our sides. We all have the right to practice medicine or practice our religion or whatever. And hopefully we can keep putting out these fires. And slowly but surely, I think it'll happen. I think things are finally starting to normalize, although, in Canada and LA, and I hear every day about new things that are happening. So nothing's guaranteed. But no, I hope it's never the same as it was in the rise of Nazi Germany and the Nazis in Austria and ultimately Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just wanted to get your opinion on it, since this is such a personal journey for you personally, but
hopefully
not a real enemy, folks. If you don't have it, get it. It is a compelling story and a compelling read. And it's so important because it brings back not only Dr. Wolf's personal story, but if you take your eye off the ball in terms of the hatred that's out there and you let it fester, right? Never again is supposed to be never again.
No, it's so true. Never forget, never again. Never too late, still fighting hate. And the big one is never again is now with the hashtag. So I don't know, those are words, but I live by them. A lot of people do. There's support. Right. I mean, there's support against hatred. We'll keep doing it. I mean, that's most people are like us. They like people. They want to meet people. They want peace. They want the best for their family, whatever the case may be. It's just, I don't know.
And never again is now only happens if we open up our mouths and we talk about it and we share the stories, read books, and go to things like Israel Appreciation Day. So we're going to cut to a segment. Let's see what is new with that event coming in September.
Absolutely. Why Israel Appreciation Day? Because no one is telling the Israel story about why Israel's existence is so important, not just as a Jewish state and not just as an ally of the United States, but for all the positive achievements Israel has contributed to the world in science, technology, medicine, human rights, religious freedoms, rule of law, democracy, and so on. We need to start winning the public relations information war and change the narrative, especially among our younger generations. We need to get the information out there and arm those people who understand the seminal importance of Israel to the world. And being the Jewish homeland doesn't begin to tell that story of why Israel is so important. It's something we all can come together on, and honestly, it's something we all must come together on. It is imperative the general public understands the nature of the very special relationship between Israel and the United States and Israel's importance to the world. So please join us on September 18th in Washington, D.C. as we celebrate Israel Appreciation Day. You'll also be able to find us live on all the streaming channels, including Roku, Apple TV, Dish Network, and others. Because never again is now.
And we're back.
And never again is now. Cannot thank Dr. Wolf enough for coming on, because it does segue in why something like Israel Appreciation Day is so important. You know, the one thing I wish again, we have time constraints, but the one thing I wish I had the opportunity to ask him really was, growing up, I always, you heard about the Holocaust, as if you're Jewish, certainly, and even if you weren't, you heard about the Holocaust. There was Holocaust training. But you always wondered, how could this happen? Because there were people in Germany and in the rest of Europe that were good people. Because the Nazis weren't the majority, right?
Yeah.
So how did good people let this happen? And when I see what's going on in this country now, where people are either not engaged, or they don't speak up, or they just let these things happen because it's not happening to them.
Yep.
I'm not sure I totally understand, but I get a better sense of it. And I would have loved his opinion on that, but again, time constraints.
It's I just really interestingly, when you guys were talking and you mentioned like, hey, did your parents talk to you about it? Did you guys ever talk about blah, blah, blah? That reminded me of the talk that Black people supposedly have with their kids. Like, oh, be careful of the cops and everybody hates you, or whatever the talk is. Although it is legitimate. I don't mean to be completely dismissive. I understand. But everyone should be having that talk with their kids. Like, why wouldn't Jewish people talk to their kids about, hey, just so you know, this is what happened and this is what led to it, so that they can be prepared, so that Jewish kids aren't out there like ending up being pro-Palestinian. Like,
well, wait a minute. Time out. I cannot speak for the current generation because I'm an old guy. I can only tell you that in my generation, your parents did speak to you about it. We lost relatives in the Holocaust. Both my father and two uncles served in the war. I don't talk about it a whole lot with people, but there are very few Jewish families who are not impacted one way or the other by the Holocaust. So current generations, I don't think they talk about it. And they didn't talk about it a lot when I was growing up. You had to ask them about it, right? And we had relatives who had the tattoos with the numbers on it, and it's disturbing. And again, the times were different. Yeah. The government's role was different. The government's position was different, and education on things like that, because it was so fresh and there were so many Holocaust survivors. It's different now, right? That's why things like, the other thing I wanted to talk to Dr. Wolf about, if you've never been to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., you have to go. You have to go to Israel. I agree with him. But there is an exhibit at the end of the Holocaust Memorial tour, right, that I'm not going to give it away, but it has to do with shoes. And anybody who's been there knows exactly what I'm talking about. It is one of the most powerful and moving things you will see in your lifetime. And it stops you in your tracks, and it makes you remember, right? And that's the flip side of, never again is now. Well, never again is now only if you remember, right? So we can sort of go from there, especially as Israel is now on the brink of a broader war with Hezbollah anyway, which is something else we can talk about. But in any event, it's good to talk with Dr. Wolf, and it's folks go buy the book. It is a compelling read, and it's a page turner too. It's not like it's a boring read, but it's a personal journey and a great story. We need to segue because 2 weeks away.
Oh my gosh!
Can we talk about SCOTUS?
Okay, there's so
Okay.
much to talk about. I don't know
All right.
how we're even going to get through everything.
We won't. Where would you like to start on SCOTUS? What was the most important decision that SCOTUS just put out, in your opinion?
Chevron, overturning Chevron.
Have you been reading my crib notes?
No,
You've been reading my crib
but
notes?
Chevron is like by far one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of all time.
All right, so to educate the listeners who don't, so the Chevron deference, right, ruling, I believe it was 1980, it was early, somewhere in the 80s, basically said that when the laws were ambiguous, the judges couldn't interpret the laws, that the judge had to defer to the administrative state, right, or the bureaucrats, basically, in the agencies in the executive branch to interpret this. And the reason this came up is
insane.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, like literally, like if you guys don't realize what Robert just said, is that the Supreme Court subverted separation of powers. So the Supreme Court said it's no longer the administrative branch's job to enforce the law, the legislative branch to write and interpret and write the law, and the Supreme Court's or the judicial branch's job to interpret the law. We're just going to subvert it completely, and now we're going to say the administrative state is in charge and they can do whatever they want. Okay, please continue.
Okay, so to back this up a little bit, the case was brought by fishermen in New Jersey and Rhode Island against NOAA, which is National Oceanographic Administration, whatever.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
I forget what it stands for.
National Oceanic and Administrative and
Yeah, new set of lips.
shit.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Oops.
Those
Excuse my
guys.
language,
Just look
my
up
bad.
NOA. Yeah, they have all
NOAA.
those guys. Those guys. So basically, they basically
Oceanic
said to
and
make
Atmospheric Administration. Yes. Okay.
Nice to have a computer, ladies and gentlemen, in front of you. So basically what ended up happening is the NOAA issued a ruling under the environmental laws that any fishing boat had to have basically a government employee with them to make sure that they weren't violating any environmental standards. And here's the catch. Not only do you have to have them with you, but you have to pay their salary. Basically, it was $700 a day. And it wasn't really their salary, but you had to pay $700 a day for the privilege of having the government make sure you weren't breaking any regulations. So and it was like 20% of their revenue, right? It's bad enough the fishermen go out and risk their lives to put food on the table, Starkist wants tunas that taste good, right? That, not good tasting or whatever that is. But in any event, they file a lawsuit. And if you've ever read Judge Gorsuch's book, which is A Republic If You Can Keep It, he talks about the fact that the real issue here is that Congress abdicated their responsibility because their responsibility under separation of powers was to make clear and unambiguous laws. The laws, 4,000 pages per law, whatever it is ambiguous. So the judges under the Chevron decision would defer to the administrative agencies who basically empowered the executive branch, right, to pass laws, even though they're not passing laws, but they're interpreting laws when it should have been under separation of power of the court. So they've overturned that doctrine, right, which is an incredibly important decision. But I want to read something, because I like to read, because we're going to get to the immunity thing in a second, right? But I want to read you the dissenting opinion. It was a 6-2 decision. Obviously, we know who the two were dissenting, and one of them had to, which is Ketanji. Is it Brown Jackson or Braxton John? I forget this stuff. But
KBJ, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Brown Jack. So Justice Kagan and Sotomayor issued the following, that the Chevron rule has formed the backdrop against the Congress and courts and agencies as regulated parties and the public have operated for decades. It has been applied to thousands of judicial decisions. It has become part of the warp and woof. I don't know what warp and woof is, ladies and gentlemen, but these are your Supreme Court justices. I just want you to know. This has become part of the warp and woof of modern government, supporting regulatory efforts of all kinds, keeping air and water clean, food and drugs safe, financial markets honest. Judges are not experts and are not part of the political branch of government. Those were the days when we knew what we are not. I don't even understand. I think I'm like reading Joe Biden stuff. Wait, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
I bumped my head. I'm sorry. Was
Right.
that English?
Right. I'm trying to figure if Joe Biden wrote this, right? Because agencies are experts in the fields and because they are part of the political branch with the claim to making
Experts.
interstitial policies, and because Congress has charged them, not us, with administering the statutes containing the open question. What? I don't even know what the hell they just said.
I
These
don't
are
know
your
if
Supreme
she
Court
knows
justices.
what she just said.
Oh, you're stealing a Trump line from the debate.
I am. I'm going to use it.
That is a Trump line from the
so
debate.
much.
I mean, I sit here and try, Chevron was thus a fundamental disruption. Oh, well, yeah, it was. So in any event, I sit there and I print out this stuff and I go, what'd they say? At the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that there's still a process to be gone here, because now it's going to go back to the judges to have to interpret the intent of Congress. And really, as we just talked about, the real issue, Ericka, is that Congress is supposed to make clear and unambiguous laws. Because if Congress makes clear and unambiguous laws, then you don't have an issue.
Correct. And that's what
That's
they've
the
been
issue.
doing for years. That's how they get away with all this nonsense. Oh, what is it? Oh, we have to pass it to figure out how much to pay for it. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. Like, they just pass stuff. They don't care.
Nancy Pelosi said, first we have to pass the bill to see what's in it.
Oh.
Come on.
Was that same difference? That tells you that broad has no idea how much that thing is going to cost, what's required, what administrative state is going to have to be set up to facilitate the thing, right? Because if Congress actually had to write laws, that's what it would have to do, instead of just giving it over to the administrative state to figure out on their own with a blank check from your pocketbook. Like, this is insane. These people are the brazenness with which they are willing to just take your stuff is astonishing to me.
Well,
Yeah. So
I get it. So can we talk about now the elephant in the room?
why are you insulting Donald Trump's weight like that, Robert? I thought we didn't make fun of people's appearances.
I don't make fun of people's appearances because, he who lives in a glass house should not throw stones. So
That is the truth.
Right. But now let's talk about presidential immunity, because the Supreme Court, as everyone on the planet now knows, has ruled that the president has immunity for official acts. He does not have immunity. And by the way, official acts are defined as they are consistent with his constitutional powers as are enumerated by the Constitution. That's what he has immunity from. What he doesn't have immunity from is unofficial acts or any acts that are outside his constitutional authority. You wouldn't know that from the way you see it in the press. And then the courts are going to have to, of course, decide, was this an official act under the Constitution or not? But here's the other thing, again, we're going to go back to reading. Where's my little cheat sheet here? So did you see the comment by Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor about assassination?
Very, very interesting. Read it.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So she basically said that when he used it, quote, this is what Justice Sotomayor said, when he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organize a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune. First of all, they didn't even read the decision. That's not what the decision says. But the hyperbole and the fear-mongering and the taking this whole thing out of context is unforgivable to me, right? You now have Chuck Schumer now calling it the MAGA court. So wait, when they rule for you, the Supreme Court is great. When they rule against you, it's a MAGA court.
These guys are clowns, absolute clowns. And this is how you know that you cannot take any of these people seriously. No taking seriously.
Well, you have to take them seriously. They're half the country, right? I mean, the country, realistically speaking, is divided. But what were they supposed to rule? They were supposed to rule because, again, they're trying to fit the narrative into a predetermined conclusion that President Trump was guilty of insurrection, never been proven, never even really, a court of law. And let's talk about the fallout now from the 3 cases that are there, right? You have the Jack Smith case, the Department of Justice, right? Whether or not Jack Smith is actually constitutionally empowered very much is called into question. I think Justice Clarence Thomas brought that one up.
Yep.
And then you have whether or not now Judge Chutkan, right, an Obama appointee, has to now narrowly figure out, is there still even a case here for this whole January 6th insurrection allegation based on the evidence?
That's right. Well, and this is another example of lawfare, Robert. They knew that eventually.
I can't believe you asked Dr. Wolf about lawfare.
I'm like, listen, I was listening to what he was saying. I'm like, oh my God, like what he's saying is literally what they're doing to their political enemies right now, you guys. They locked up their political enemies. They used a bunch of bogus, trumped up charges, and they knew that it would take years and years and years to go through the courts. And by then there would be enough damage and enough people will have suffered. Think about that. There are people who have been in jail for the last 3.5 years now that have essentially been exonerated. What happens to them?
Well, hopefully they get released, but they certainly don't get their 3.5 years back or their money or their reputation.
So on that note, how about we listen to a story or an advertisement for Bruce Abramson's new book?
Love it. Go for it.
We are in a battle with today's progressive left for the heart and soul of America. Dr. Bruce Abramson's new book, American Spirit or Great Awakening, provides you with the evidence you need to push back against the left's new religion, wokeism, with its radical views on race, gender, sexuality, and climate. This new religion, which has captivated America's spiritually starved young, urban, credentialed, and professional elites, has a goal of replacing the Judeo-Christian values that America and our institutions were founded on. If you value our Constitution and all that has made America great, then you need to get your copy of Dr. Abramson's new book today. The American Spirit or Great Awakening can be found on Amazon.
Dun, dun, dun.
Another good book.
Another great book.
The Great Awakening. I will say it does seem to me that the pendulum is finally starting to swing back the other way. The problem is it has swung so far left, lack of a better term, that it's gonna take a while. But it does really take people speaking up, and there is a recentering, a rebalancing in the federal government, because clearly, certainly since the 1980s and the explosion of the administrative state, we have far less rights, and it's really, I don't care what anybody tells you, the power of government no longer flows from the bottom up. It may flow from the bottom up once again at some point. It certainly doesn't now. As she's drinking her water.
That's right. That is right, y'all. And if you are not participating, it's your fault. Just for the record, blaming the viewer, blaming the listener, totally.
So let's talk about those other cases, right? So now what happens in New York? Because I'm hearing there was sentencing scheduled for July 11th for the president's, guilty. He's a felon, he's a convicted felon or whatever. Obviously, he's now going to appeal and want the verdict thrown out based on the presidential immunity ruling. That's going to be interesting to see what the judge in New York does. And I'm being told that they're going to push the sentencing to allow him time to do that, right? He's supposed to be sentenced on July 11th, which would have been, I mean, you think you've seen a media frenzy? That would be a media frenzy. And
we should go to New York for the announcement.
There's that movie Escape from New York. I escaped from New York. I don't think I'm going back. So I think Kurt Russell was in that, if I remember correctly, but don't hold me to that. So what happened to the Georgia case? No one hears about the Georgia case.
the Georgia, that's because they found a bunch of fraudulent ballots in Georgia, didn't they? Didn't they find Benjamin? Didn't we? What were we reading about that in Georgia? It turned out that there was like a bunch of ballots that didn't get signed. There was a bunch of crap that came out. So I feel
are you saying there weren't free and fair elections in 2020?
Am I going to get us kicked off of? Yeah, I am not getting us a community guideline strike again. Okay.
Ooh, I tried to bait you.
No, YouTube, if you're listening, I remember reading a story about Georgia and a bunch of stuff coming out, because that was where he was in trouble for, messing with the election or some crap, right? Like, or with the Secretary of State. Was that one?
I think it was
Georgia
Ratzenberger. I forget his name, but apparently, I think supposedly he has Trump on tape saying, "Find me 12,000 votes." No, I haven't heard the video,
right.
And I don't know that's accurate. But where's the case? Remember, the Georgia case was supposed to be the case that got Trump. The New York case was not supposed to be the case. Of course, then again, when you take a federal law whose statute of limitations has expired, link it to a New York law on a victimless crime.
The rules.
And change the rules, you can convict anybody, right? It does really happen that way. But I still want to come back to this debate. By the way, the highlight or low light of the debates. What was your highlight of the debate?
Oh my God, the golf conversation was so stupid. No. Okay, first of all, it was I said I would play if you carry your own bag. I gotta. And then Trump's like, the biggest lie of the whole night is that he has a 6 handicap. and then Biden's like, I'm gonna fight you.
So to me, the best line of the night was, after this long rambling, and he says, we beat Medicare. Trump's response was, yeah, you beat it to death. Right. And not that he was really talking about Medicare. I'm trying to find my little notes here. Not that he was really talking about Medicare. Right. I mean, I think he was talking about. Oh, there we are. He wasn't even talking about Medicare. He was talking about, I think, abortion or rape. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
no.
Here, by the way.
Was it the abortion conversation that he made about January 6th?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
So he's talking about, abortion and pro-choice, and then the cop rape comes up, right? And you just sort of sit there and look, you feel sorry for the guy because his handler should not have put him out there. And we've said that. And I didn't feel good watching my president, who is clearly either senile or pre-senile. Apparently he's now 10-4 Joe, right? He's only good between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. But said the following, and this is from the quote from the debate, if you haven't seen it. Look, there's so many young women who have been, pause, including a young woman who was just murdered, and he, pause, he went to the funeral, pause, the idea that she was murdered by a pause, by another pause, by an immigrant coming in, and they talk about that, but here's the deal. There's a lot of young women who are being raped by their pause, by their in-laws, by their pause, by their spouses,
what?
Pause, by their brothers and sisters, by pause, just pause. It's just, pause again, it's just ridiculous, and they can do nothing about it. Now, I realize that listening to me say this does not have the impact of it, but I'm sitting there watching the debate, cringing, not in glee. This, to me, this wasn't about, Donald Trump's having a good night or a bad night. This was watching my president absolutely, am I allowed to say shit the bed? I mean, and I don't feel good, about it.
No,
because it's my president.
Here, Robert, anybody who has had a grandparent or a great grandparent or anybody in their family that they have seen go through,
oh my God,
the loss of vitality. Okay. That made me sad. That was like, if somebody took my grandma who had dementia and put her up on the stage, that was cruel. That was mean. And I think anybody who allows their family member to deal with that has to be, we have to question the motivation of the people in charge.
No, you don't. You don't have to question the motivation. Motivation is simple. The motivation is to cling to power at any cost, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. If they're willing to put this guy out there, right? And like I said, they had to have known. They clearly knew
Obviously.
that cognitively he's declined. I mean, come on, the whole inner circle thing, whether it's Ron Klain or whoever, right? They had to know. And yet they put him out there, Adderall and all, and he still performed like this. So here's the other question in all of this. Who's really making the decisions here? Because he's clearly not capable of making the decisions, other than the fact that I hear he's got a mean-ass temper, right? When he hears something that he doesn't like, and he's, behind closed
Also
doors can
sounds
be
like
pretty...
a dementia patient.
Well, look, God rest his soul. My dad passed away towards the end. He would have fits of anger out of nowhere. We were all there for it, and it was tough.
Yep.
So I take no joy in any of this.
They get scared, and that's how they react.
Yeah. So it's sad to me. But the other great line, of course, was you got to love Trump's sort of TV timing, right?
Cavalier, yeah.
After I forget, he rambled on. I think it was the Medicare line about we finally beat Medicare. He goes, I don't know what he said. He says, I don't think he knew what he said.
I don't think he knows what he said.
Right. So, but it's not something to laugh at. It's just we watch debates because they're like a blood sport, and I'm not sure that's a good thing, right? If you remember that the line from the movie Gladiator, that the mob is Rome. Right.
Yeah, no, I do want it to be a blood sport because our president has to go out on the world stage, sack up, and fight against the worst people on the world. Our president is going to have to send people to war to die. Our president has to be the biggest hard ass that has ever walked the face of the earth.
I don't disagree with any of that, but what I disagree with is the public spectacle. In a gladiatorial sense that we like to see politics. It's like it's like when you had 16 Republican presidential candidates on the stage. All they did was beat each other. I mean, it doesn't reflect poorly. It doesn't reflect well. It reflects poorly on I think all of America. I think there's a more dignified way of look. Of course, you want someone who can make tough decisions. Of course, you want someone who unfortunately can send our men and women in the armed forces into harm's way to protect the country, because that's their first job as president, is to keep us safe. But I don't think the country is better off on any level for these prefabricated media events that we call a debate just to see gotcha points or who did what, right?
Yeah.
Who said what? Ooh, that was a good one. Ooh, it was a good comeback. I think it demeans the process. And I think there's got to be a better way. And the problem is, you know who the real villains are in all of this? Who are the real villains in all of this?
The Democrats.
No, the real villains are the media, who did not tell the truth, and that's their job.
Oh,
their job is to. I mean, they've been spinning
yeah.
this, and they've been carrying the water for the Democrats for 20 years for sure.
That's right.
Right. But we can come back to that. We're getting the 1 minute high side warning.
Yes.
Okay, so it's good to be back. There's a lot we need to talk about, and we have just yet begun to get into the real presidential primary season prediction.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to end on this one. Is Joe Biden the nominee come November?
Absolutely not. Not a chance in hell. No.
Who's the nominee?
My mom.
I got a thought for you. What if they reach out to Robert F. Kennedy and make him the nominee?
Shut up.
That's an interesting thought, don't you think?
Ooh, on that note, y'all need to go like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel wherever you're watching, and most importantly, y'all, share this video with somebody that you think needs to hear the truth about Joe Biden.
Everybody knows the truth about Joe Biden. This is no longer about Joe Biden. Remember, what's more important, 90 minutes or 3.5 years?
Mm.
Just